And actually, one of the great things the banner does is, if you're living in the South in the United States, we've biographies of great Southern ministers, or if you're interested in the 18th century, the Great Awakening, we've got Edwards and Brainerd. Or if you would love to wander around London in the middle of the 17th century, we've got Bunyan and Owen. And if you're Scottish, you can wander around Edinburgh in the middle of the 19th century, when it seemed as though, from this perspective, giants, walked on Princes Street. And one of these men was Hugh Martin, probably one of the lesser well-known, but a man of immense theological genius, and a man living in awakening times, really, who had a great passion for the gospel. And the Trust has published a number of his works already. He was born in 1822. He went to university in Aberdeen. He was the first prize man in mathematics. He must have been still only 16 when he graduated, then studied theology. He was the first person to be licensed as a minister of the gospel in the Free Church after the disruption in 1843. And he then went, 1844, I think, to be pastor of a church on the edge of Carnoustie. And he ministered there for, I think, about 14 years. Then he went to a church in Edinburgh and ministered there for, I think, about 7 years. And latterly, he was quite unwell. He really struggled, I think, for the rest of his life. He was in and out of hospital, and he spent really the last third of his life as a kind of editor and author. And nowadays, I think that we would look back and think that was Hugh Martin's major contribution. And at the heart of that was his intense focus on the person and work of Christ. And most of the material that we have, I think, from him in books, some of the material that's only in documents and libraries, is focused on Christ. And one thing that really very much interests me about him is that he was obviously an able mathematician. But the reason I think that is important is, I think if you're going to do well in mathematics, you've got to be able to think logically. Yes. And this is the thing that I think more than anything else impresses me about Hugh Martin. You don't feel that he's just regurgitating wine that someone else has poured into a different wine bottle, and that he had thought very intensely and long about the significance of the person of Christ and the work of Christ. And so I think when people read him, that's one of the things they really feel, oh, this is different from what I'm used to. Not because necessarily he's saying things in general they have never heard before, but he thinks down into the logic of the gospel. And I think for me that is one of his huge appeals. And maybe the way I could put it is this, that I think it's possible to teach and preach from the Bible by giving a kind of commentary on the text of Scripture, without conveying the sense that the text is not Christ. It is the word of Christ, but it's not Jesus Christ himself. And Martin was tremendously impressed by this notion that I think comes out in Hebrews chapter 13, that Jesus Christ is the same today as he was yesterday. And that yesterday is the way he was in the Gospels. And so you very much get a sense, I think, with Hugh Martin, that you're not just dealing with a doctrine here when you're talking about Christ or the atonement, but that he's getting to the heart of the person and to the inner logic of the gospel. And I think those are some of the reasons I found his works really a treat to read. And I think, I think everyone I've known who is a preacher who has been exposed to Martin has kind of felt the stamp of Martin upon them, because he's fairly unique in the literature of the last 200 years or so. And a number of other topics that he touches on, and they appear in the different books. So the work that's been out for a while, Christ for Us, which is a book of sermons. And while most of them are on Christ, there are elements of them that are focused on, so what does it mean for us to be united to Christ? Because union with Christ, which interestingly is a theme that has kind of re-emerged in evangelical writing probably only in the last 20 years, but it was embedded in Martin's theology. And then probably his, in a way, his greatest work, although I think it may also be for some people his most difficult work, on the atonement, which for many people is a tough read, but it's tremendously rewarding. Plus, he expounded Scripture, and this volume on Jonah, the trust has had in print, I think, since time I was a student, so it's that's almost since Hugh Martin's time. And then this wonderful book, which is expository, The Shadow of Calvary, which takes you through the three great stages of the Passion of Christ, the Garden of Gethsemane. And there again you get the sense that he's not just been reading a commentary and reworking it. He's really focused intensely on what is actually happening here. Not just what is the text saying in terms of literature, but what actually happened to Christ in Gethsemane and then in his trial.